This is the Friends of History Debating Society. I'm Gaius. Germanicus is here. We're in our wine bar by the really choppy Thames tonight. Cold, very cold. And the centurions are gathering. They've got their large vases of wine, very large, but they are retired centurions. They've been known to drink a lot of wine. Germanicus and I are enjoying our second cup and reflecting on events in the 21st century that challenge and at the same time comfort us here in the first century AD. We look for our institutions and how they work out. What institution? Law, obviously, a big one. And the foundations of our civilization are built on marble, not wood, and stone, not wood. And the same for the 21st century. The leadership imitates how we endeavored. Our Senate is a representation of the well-to-do and the powerful and well-placed and those trusted, the families of the blood. The emperors are chosen here in the first century AD, you'd have to say family ties, except for the Julian Claudian reign ended with Nero's peculiar suicide. He's rumored to have said, the world loses a great actor, as he was assisted in his suicide by his slave, his servant. And then the Flavian line, and we're at the end of the Flavian line now with a very disappointing Domitian, who sits in Rome, feeling persecuted. The good thing about him and feeling persecuted is he is persecuted. Correct, and it's the only governance we have on him. However, we're going to attend ourselves to events in the 21st century. That entertains us, and the centurions want to know if their sacrifice was worthwhile. I say it is, but tonight we have some uncomfortable evidence that things are going badly in the 21st century. Germanicus, a very good evening to you. I begin with the rumors of war. The president has said, this is the Emperor Trump, the president of the United States has said that he's sort of made up his mind about invading Venezuela. Doesn't mean he will, might mean he won't. And gathered off the shores of Venezuela is a sizable, powerful, and deliberately glamorous military force. Navy, Marines, Air Force, all manner of craft. At the same time, cyber technology is plunging into Caracas, and I imagine everybody's IP is being watched very carefully. The agents provocateur are in place. False flag could happen at any moment. Maduro, so far, the dictator, is either being defiant, foolish, or misunderstood. He keeps writing notes to friends in Moscow, friends in Paris, friends in London, explaining himself and asking for help, as at this moment, no help is coming. The question for us, and the centurions are leaning forward, what are the risks, what are the gains by stomping on what is, everybody understands, a narco-terrorist state that is not built to withstand the power of the Air Force, the Navy, the Marine Corps, and eventually the Army and agents provocateur. It wasn't built that way. The Venezuelan army is for suppressing its population, which is suppressed. Those who haven't fled are helpless. What are the risks of, what you have to say, riding to the rescue because they've been defiant of the emperor? Good evening to you, Germanicus.
Good evening, Gaius. The so-called backyard is the most familiar representation of America's view of the Caribbean, is very deep-rooted. It goes back at least to the Monroe Doctrine. Although American colonists from Massachusetts, New England more broadly, took part in the failed gigantic British expedition against one of the great cities in Colombia. This was in the 1730s, and it just Cartagena de Indias. And 4,000 American colonists died in that siege, along with tens of thousands of British in all their ships. So America has been in some form connected with what is known as filibustering, which has its origins in the Dutch word freebooter, which in the Latin languages comes out as filibustero. And that is the original context in which North Americans interacted with the Spanish Empire in its later days. After the Revolution, that continued, and initially the U.S. was supportive of the fledgling eaglets in Latin America, and the Monroe Doctrine was meant to protect them, at least titularly, as much as to carve out a U.S. sphere. But the U.S. Always jealously guarded its predominance in Mesoamerica and the Caribbean area, and it was actively involved, especially after the Mexican War and the filibustering expeditions like Walker's to Nicaragua. But in the period after the Civil War, slowly leading up to the Spanish-American War, the Grant administration was on course to buy Santo Domingo, the Dominican Republic, and its great bay, Samana Bay. And then came the Cuban-Spanish Wars and the intervention of the U.S. eventually in 1898. And the U.S. also intervened in Venezuela in 1895, I believe. And this was over debts. And it was understood and considered acceptable in the 19th century that the foremost powers, meaning the foremost lenders, could always send their battleships and start bombarding a third world country if it reneged on its debts. This actually was the prelude to the French invasion of Mexico in 1860. So this kind of activity really is not only steeped in American tradition and American lore, but it also has symbolic significance because, as I said, the U.S., even as a young power with no aspirations or ambitions across the two oceans, was still deeply invested in Mesoamerica and the Caribbean. And in many ways, what Mr. Trump is doing, I think, is signaling a kind of ritual reframing of American power, which, of course, will focus more on these accepted and hallowed traditions from the Monroe Doctrine, but also it sends a kind of sub rosa message to China and Russia that we're not as interested in what goes on in your near abroad. And it's a way of kind of beginning to lower the overall temperature, which it seemed to be in the early 2020s under Mr. Biden, to have us marching toward simultaneous wars with China, Iran, and Russia. And so in many ways, finding a substitute bad guy, a substitute character from, say, a Bond movie, and emphasizing the cartelista dimension as though this is a criminal enterprise in the U.S. Must deal with that. And of course, there is the direct needle connection, if you will, to the opioid, fentanyl, crack cocaine, all of the various cocktail of drugs that are flowing into the U.S., although the vast majority come through Mexico or come in maybe through Canada and its connection to China or directly from China. It's all very murky. But the fact is, this, as I said, is a symbolic initiative. It's an enterprise that is in many ways more about demonstration, more about a show of exercising our power. And it has, however thin the basis for it, it's still real. It's not as it was the case in Ukraine, for example, that we're going to go into a place which has always been, part of the Russian sphere, and we're going to essentially aggressively move on Russia. This is very different, and no one can really argue. You can argue with the specifics, of course, but no one can really argue with this larger tradition that the U.S. has of intervening in the Caribbean and Mesoamerica when its own security and welfare are compromised, if not threatened.
We come to spheres of influence then, the 19th century practice of the great powers. This is our zone, that's your zone. Don't project power into us, and we won't project power into you. That would be acceptable for the emperor to demonstrate authority within easy reach. No foreign power is going to easily intervene. And it wouldn't be easy to resupply Venezuela as it was, for example, to resupply Vietnam from either China or Russia. It would be very difficult to resupply. So we're looking at an easy, straightforward victory. Are there risks?
There are huge risks, and the if you will, hugeness of those risks, to borrow an inflection from our emperor, is that the U.S. connection to military and strategic realities has declined massively in the last decade. And we have no true awareness of how much our military capabilities have declined, how much our people, in terms of leadership and execution of military tasks, has declined. And we don't have the arsenal anymore, the stocks, the ordnance. All of these things are depleted thanks to the war in Ukraine. And we're not in a very good position to intervene, even against a third world country, or a narco state, as you called it. The Houthi were completely obdurate, and we had to finally just sail away, having achieved nothing against them. And so I can't imagine what great outcome would be achieved here. But of course, it's the whole equation here is different from going up against a fired up tribal presence, and the much more entangled and complex web of relationships between the countries of the Caribbean and Mesoamerica on one hand, and the United States on the other. And I think that it's hard to untangle this in a way that will allow us to understand exactly what the calculus is on the part of someone like Maduro. Certainly he remembers Panama, and he also remembers a lot of American grandstanding, but the ability of the U.S. at the same time to really exert very powerful force. And also on his mind must be the decapitation protocols, shall we say, that have been pioneered by Israel, which would make him very nervous, I would think. And of course, it's been reported that he's already offered, it's almost like tribute, offering the emperor 300 million barrels of oil. This is very much an insight into the fact that this is less a straightforward military issue than it is a very aggressively conducted negotiation.
You haven't mentioned Bay of Pigs or the missile crisis.
Well, this is not Bay of Pigs, because although we would want or wish for the Venezuelan people, or especially major units of the Venezuelan armed forces, to go over to the democratic opposition, and thus Maduro would have to leave. A kind of a democratic coup. This not so different from what we did in Ukraine, although this is much closer and could be potentially accessible. It could be one of the many subversions that we can begin to orchestrate, because the key thing here will be the loyalty of the army. It will be the creating a kind of atmosphere in which he begins to see, that is, Maduro begins to see that his time is short. We offer him a way out. All of that would be what goes on here, but it would have to be something similar, for example, to what Teddy Roosevelt did with Colombia when he orchestrated a coup, and Panama broke away so that he had Panama and could now begin to build the Trans-Isthmian Canal.
That would be the neat end, but that's not happening. What about a missile crisis? Do we know whether he has a nuke or not?
No, well, I wouldn't go that far. I mean, he probably has some reasonable Russian air defense systems. So it would seem to me that a strike would be risky. And any kind of insertion of force outside of the little motor vessel we have off the coast, the Ocean Trader, which is full of soft guys, and they're only good if they're going to do a quick decapitation, or they're going to support some element of whatever the CIA assets already in the country are doing. So I mean,
I don't see that you can rule out the fact that things will go badly on the ground.
Oh, I don't either.
Every year in Gaul, there would be an eruption somewhere, and the legions would put themselves at risk, knowing that once they arrived on scene, they'd win, but they had to arrive on scene. That's how they get in trouble.
One thing we don't know is what the dynamics are within the armed forces of Venezuela.
Very good. We don't have a lot of information.
Well,
our emperor charged into situations before.
Yes, right. I would think that if the military was shaky, then Maduro would not be in a position to mount an effective resistance and would leave.
He would have left already, Michael. It would have happened.
See, I'm just hypothesizing here, and if there is a sense of unanimity sufficient to put up an effective resistance, then there is no way that we can have a decapitating military insertion, and there are risks even to conducting airstrikes or trying to get rid of the inner circle, because those can fail, and then where are you? And we all still remember Desert One in the waning days of the Carter administration. What
about the tools of sanctions? That's what we use on other hotspots. Why aren't we using them here? Why is this a demonstration of kinetic energy only?
Well, because it is a demonstration. It's meant to be a kind of clarion call that is sending out signals at different levels.
All right. You just give me an image. It's called George Bush landing on an aircraft carrier with a sign saying "Mission accomplished." That is possible.
Yeah, that's one thing that's one option that Mr. Trump has, is to get some kind of good-looking deal or tribute out of Maduro, and then say, "Look, it's a trade. It's a transaction that has been successful. We don't have to invade. We've achieved our goal. And by the way, we can keep interdicting these boats, et cetera, et cetera." But the big problem, because I did mention Mexico earlier, is that Mexico is the big problem. And the president of Mexico is now, if not under siege, is under a lot of pressure domestically. People are very angry at what's happening with the surge in murders across the country, and the armed bands in in Mexico are truly horrendous, and they operate all through the United States as well. And
there's no fleet off of Mexico. There is a fleet off of Venezuela. It's been there for a while.
Right. I think the Venezuelan thing, again, I said it's sending out messages at various levels or altitudes, and one of those messages is directed at Mexico, and maybe hoping to leverage the president so that she acquiesces to the U.S. and Mexico working together against the cartels. That's where the real danger is. If you want to focus on the danger of cartels, that's where they are in Venezuela.
I don't want a success. I want Venezuela. Is he going to invade, and what happens when he invades? You've not eliminated from my concern that this would be a guerrilla combat. That
it could go that way because
that if we try to occupy anything, we'll be subject to a counterattack.
Well, let me go back a few years then to the problem of what's called net assessment. And in all of the wars that the U.S. has fought since Korea, our net assessment has been absolutely poor. Even in the so-called victory of Desert Storm, we missed major dynamics in Iraqi society. And I won't go into detail, but the truth is that when it comes to places like Ukraine or the decisions made by George W. Bush, the invasion of Iraq, these were massive failures of net assessment. So I do not in any way discount the possibility that there will be a poor assessment, a misassessment that will lead to an operation that might end in disaster. And the entire pathway to the past has been a series of calamities for the U.S. And like Vietnam and everything that came after, we just shrugged them off. I mean, does anyone remember the debacle in Kabul, handing over hundreds of millions of U.S. weapons to the Taliban? Nobody remembers that now. We negotiate with the Taliban, so they were regular guys, and they are.
All right. Bottom line: if he goes to Venezuela, does he get a win-win, or do we get a nightmare?
It could be a win-win, depending on what they know. See, there's no way for us to know what the administration understands as actual reality, and B, what the administration together will decide in terms of whether or not the risk-reward relationship is worth giving a go-ahead to an attack. I mean, I've just been trying to say that I wouldn't count on the administration having a good assessment, but I could be wrong. But, I think that the biggest problem with U.S. net assessment in the post-war era has been the fact that we always privilege our desires. And so we always end up concluding that what we want to happen will, in fact, happen because we have God and the right on our side. And it almost never does, because there's nothing worse in an assessment than privileging your own desires. And so I don't see any evidence that there are hard, cold people in the inner circle who will say, wait, we're in no position to go beyond this level. Or if we're sure that the situation in Venezuela is unstable enough that we can push it over the edge, well, maybe we could do it. Maybe we should do it. But I don't see that kind of really cool, rational set of trade-offs occurring in this administration or the last.
Germanicus, we know now that Kennedy didn't know anything. We know now that Kennedy didn't know anything in 62 for the missile crisis and didn't know anything in 61 for the Bay of Pigs. We know that. So we could have sat there and said, we don't know what the president knows. We don't know what the executive committee is pondering. We do know now. So by analogy, we know what Trump knows. We know it. It's not hidden. And
well, the key element to me is the dynamics within the Venezuelan armed forces, and if they have knowledge that certain units will join the rebel cause, then okay.
It won't be just the military. The narco gangs are well armed.
They are, but they're well armed for the kind of work that they do,
and for guerrilla warfare.
Well, if they there has to be enough unanimity within the groups capable of resistance in Venezuela.
At any time in the last 300 years, have we ever heard of an opposition that had unanimity? Any time?
No, but I'm not talking about ayes or nays around the table and parliamentary procedure. I'm talking about are the Venezuelan people, and especially their armed forces, ready to get together and fight?
No, not. Just the way we have an allied army driving on Paris. Who thinks they can take over the city? The communists.
Right. Yeah. So, well, the bottom line is, from everything I can see, which is not very much, my sense is that any major intervention, anything of large scale, is going to be, well, the first part of the word is cluster, and we all know what the second part is. I just don't see a good outcome. And
let's go to Washington. We'll put this down as undecided at this moment. Okay, is that fair? Undecided. We don't know whether he can or can't. The emperor can or can't get away from it. We know that he's teasing that he might, but we don't know that that's not a misdirection.
Well, there's one more thing to add, and that is he doesn't want to look weak if he decides not to do anything. So that means, A, that most of the pressure on him will be to do something so that he doesn't look like a fool, or B, he's going to have a consolation prize that allows him to stand down and say, we achieved this, and that's what we really were after.
I'm told the planning is this week.
I'm sure it is.
This week. It hasn't happened yet.
They can't keep those forces there forever and not do anything.
Germanicus, Gaius, 1st century AD, pondering an expedition to Caracas. We're going to move to Washington, D.C. now, because there's, again, evidence everywhere that this is the end of the Republic, that we're moving into an emperor stage. We've been talking about the president as if he's emperor. Well, the legislative branch is getting ready, and so are the courts. When we come back, the Friends of History Debating Society in Londinium. It's very chilly outside. The Thames is nobody's friend tonight, and we're enjoying ourselves. The fire is warm here. I hope it's warm wherever you are. This is live. I'm John Batchelor. This is the Friends of History Debating Society. I'm Gaius. Germanicus is here, and we move from the pondering of a military expedition to observing Washington in the 21st century, in the year 2025, and looking for evidence that the Republic is reviving itself, reawakening, or weakening, or is over. What happened to us in the 1st century BCE is that the Republic was under stress all 100 years. Certainly Sulla was an example of that, but so were the mobs whenever someone came forward with a populist idea. Sulla was the opposite of that, a practice session in dictator. And then Caesar and Pompey and Crassus, and then Caesar, and then Mark Antony, and then Octavian, and then we had an emperor. Are we watching that in the United States? I can't say, but I've got evidence to suggest the U.S. is following the same course we did. What happened is that everybody accepted the fact that the Senate was completely corrupt. Our Senate, totally corrupt. And that's why they vied for governorships. You'd go out, you'd plunder everybody in the province for a year or two and make yourself very rich and come back and share your spoils with your pals in the Senate, and then somebody else would go out. And the whole culture was moving towards recognizing wealth as more powerful than government. Well, that's where it appears to be in a new book that I recommend to you in the 21st century. I have access to Amazon. Devil's Advocates, the hidden story of Rudy Giuliani, Hunter Biden, and the Washington insiders on the payrolls of corrupt foreign interests. No kidding. What is a corrupt foreign interest? It's the Democratic Republic of Congo, okay? A man by the name of Kabila wants to remain in power, but he hasn't held a legitimate election in a few decades. He's forgotten how. He wants his money from the U.S., however. The DRC is on the list for AID. This is pre-Trump. And the way he does it is take into account that at some point there will be a Republican administration. At some point there'll be a Democratic administration. So he spreads his money on both sides. Now, the Republicans and the Democrats actually sell influence differently. The Republicans think that it's going to get them into trouble because of this silly law they passed in the 20th century called FARA, where you have to register if you're working for someone overseas. They wrote it up, I learned, the first time because there was some concern in the U.S. Congress that working for the Hitlerites was unwise, that wasn't a good direction to go. So we want to know who you are. So they came up with a law, the FARA Act. And there's reason to avoid registering that you're working for the Democratic Republic of Congo. Or similar, there was a game they played called the Torturer's Ball, and you get the best money from the worst countries. Well, so you want to avoid registering that you're working for Kabila. The way you do that is you do it money under the table, or you have a cutout. That's the way the Republicans do it. Now, they got caught at it, and that's why Paul Manafort went to jail for a while. Manafort was the man who invented why take $100,000 from an American election and lose your reputation when you can take $1 million from a foreign administration, and even if he doesn't win, you get to keep the money, and he's pleased for the publicity. So Manafort came up with this, and other people in the Republican Party have followed it. That's what the book has. On the Democratic side, this is the thing that makes me smile, Germanicus. They don't bother hiding. They come up with think tanks where they go during their interregnum when they're not in power. And once they're in power, they go right into the Oval Office. The long list, Anita Dunn, remember her? Well, she was in the Obama administration. She was in the Biden administration. And in between, she was at a think tank that when she goes back into the administration, the think tank gets paid, not her. She gets paid by the think tank. So it's all open. It's so open that it suggests to me that everybody's in on the game. And you say, well, how is this hurting anything? You're doing private diplomacy. The only time you get excited about it is when you use our private diplomacy against us for political advancement. Well, okay. I go along with that. There are naive statements made by AID in the State Department that the money you're taking is blood money. Okay, nobody says not, but the rejoinder is, hey, it's the real world. We're not living in utopia. So my question to you, Germanicus, not to tell any more colorful stories. Kabila was made a senator for life, and now he gets to pick the president who works for him. That was the solution. And the State Department said, well, that's not exactly what we had in mind, but it's better than not holding an election. So they went along with it. All right. There are other wonderful stories like that, like offering to work for the Taliban or offering to work for sanctioned arms makers out of Russia. Really, working for the enemy because it's private diplomacy. So my question to you is this signs of the Republic ending, or does this mean we've already ended it and we haven't seen the headline?
There are different vantages that you can open up in terms of how you see things. One vantage historically would be to compare the era we're in now with the Gilded Age, the period beginning with the Civil War in the North and then going on in the 1870s and 80s and into the 90s, where the corporations owned government. And they would give money to people. They would create sinecures, and the spoils system as a
James C. Blaine was known as the senator from the railroads.
Yeah, well, I mean, that would be the Credit Mobilier scandal in Grant's time in office, but there were so many others, and they all involved money sloshing around and people getting paid where they shouldn't be getting paid, or the railroads getting huge, government subsidies and saying, oh, we need 150 million, but actually to build the railroad, it only costs 70 million. So, but this is almost exactly what you see in the U.S. today, and places like AID or NED, National Endowment for Democracy, and U.S. Institute for Peace, and then all these other domestic money laundering schemes, mostly for green energy, where tons of money gets funneled to fraudulent receivers who say, oh, we're building this and we're building that, and they're just raking it in. And the whole
taking money from our adversaries is the question I have for you. Not from people who are, they have a pitch. I'm talking about the enemy. So,
well, I mean, what I'm leading up to is the three vantages, and the first vantage is to look at the Gilded Age. But of course, in the Gilded Age, we didn't have foreign entanglements, so there were no foreign powers subsidizing us, except perhaps Russia, because you remember Grant took a long expedition to Russia, and there were several little scandals in his administration surrounding Russia. In other words, for example, the Russian ambassador spent the equivalent of $21 million bribing senators to buy Alaska.
Yeah.
Wow, there you go. So there is that angle, but today it's much different because we're all over the world, and as you point out, the most loathsome nematode regimes can have leverage and impact in the U.S. And you go up to the high level places, Israel, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, enormous leverage. And it's not in our interest. And the problem isn't our adversaries. The problem is our friends and allies. Now, China was a problem when it was bribing American universities, setting up the so-called Confucius centers, and essentially buying off academics by the score, by the hundred. Yeah, that was an adversary who wasn't at that time, when all this was happening, understood to be an adversary. It was a frenemy, so it was a competitor, but we love China, so it's all right. And the honeypots, like with Swalwell, yeah, all of that's happening. So you do have a huge amount of foreign penetration into the various avenues of government in the U.S. And the third vector, or third vantage, is the vantage of the sectarian conflict in America between two different ideologies that really function as religions, and between which there is no quarter. And this, I think, gets at the metaphor of that we all know from the last decades before Augustus, where the law, which is supposed to be the overarching proscenium that binds us all together and to which we all submit and submit willingly, is torn away. That is exactly what's happening today in the US. And you have district circuit court judges vetoing what the president can do. Then you have nullification from states now, which, again, it's contravening the Constitution, but nobody seems to care. And you also have the potential for that big time from MAGA as well, because MAGA is responding in the same way. And Antifa, for example, is funded by all of these nonprofit organizations who have deep, cozy relationships, as you described, with Blue, and will go from their so-called think tanks, which are really just, money laundering places, into government as soon as it's possible. But they're funding the kind of violent activity against the current administration. It's a bit like all of these nice Irish American descendants of immigrants in Boston who would regularly send money to the IRA back in the 70s and 80s.
Is the republic over?
It is over when it breaks down.
We're practicing.
We're in the reason I brought up three different vantages is that each of those vantages weakens the system. The corruption damages trust in government and makes government unworkable. And the corruption feeds into the ideological struggle because it fuels it literally, so that people have a vested interest in joining, say, the resistance, whether the resistance at that moment happens to be red in spirit or blue in spirit, because there's money to be made. See, so and that wasn't as bad in the Gilded Age, and there's a reason why. The reason is that we had fought a civil war, and the South was still in a position of subordination to the North, and you could get the tremendous distortions of having the New York Republican Party name the next president of the United States because of the aftermath of the Civil War and the dynamics that existed at the time. Today, you have two equally powerful forces, and they are irreconcilably dead set on destroying the other. So it's only a matter of time before all of these come together, and then playing into the mix, which we can see so clearly in the so-called Republican Civil War that has broken out since the assassination of Charlie Kirk. You see the massive intervention of Israel attempting to control what happens in red. And that, of course, only makes things worse, pushes people more to the extremes. And this is a kind of very combustible pattern when you have all three of these malign forces intersecting.
The emperor. We don't have him yet. We're practicing. I'm looking for where are we in the scale of slipping into empire?
Well, this is the problem. You slip into it without noticing. What happened after, at the very beginning of the Principate, was that Augustus was the principal first citizen. Right. He didn't have ruling office. And even before him, famously, Gaius Julius Caesar refused the crown, as Shakespeare would say, thrice. And so you don't have, I mean, Sulla was essentially an emperor, and then he retired. So you slip into it without even noticing what has happened. And nobody in the Principate in Augustus's time talked about the fall of the Republic. I mean, which you'll see famously redacted through British literature and Robert Graves and the BBC and I, Claudius. No one was talking about we must bring back the Republic. The Republic was still with them. The Senate was still powerful, but everything had changed. And I think that's the process that everyone will still talk loudly about our democracy, even as they have almost invisibly replaced it, although it isn't invisible. And this is why social media is so important right now, because all of this comes out, and it adds fuel to the flames.
We're speaking of where we are in the Republic. Are we still going to recover, or do we plunge into an empire, which can be described as a kleptocracy if you're not in it? If you're in it, you recognize this is the way the world is. Power comes out of the barrel of a gun, and the man with more guns, that is, rich, wins. We're going to turn to the aging brain of the emperor. Is it a thing? This is the Friends of History Debating Society. I'm Gaius. Germanicus is here. The centurions are worried. They're worried because they know that the empire, in that transition from republic to empire, had a civil war. Are we in a civil war condition? Unknown. When we come back, the aging brain of the emperor. I'm John Batchelor. This is the Friends of History Debating Society. I'm Gaius. Germanicus and I are pondering signs of government troubles. One government trouble, not obvious, but it's there, is the emperor's power of concentration and memory. The emperor is senior. For all emperors, he's senior, Mr. Trump. And he seems to have a very short attention span and not to be slowed down by anything at all. He keeps going. The pace is frantic. That can be a sign of an aging brain. It can be the sign of a young man's brain who's just, at this moment, filled with adrenaline and confidence. Okay, I can't choose. I'm not doing psychology here, but there are dangers in an aging emperor's brain. We lived through it. We, the Romans, lived through it. Tiberius was a troubled dictator. And when he came to the office, he lost interest. At some point, he just lost interest and designated power to others back in Rome. Now, that doesn't seem to be the model Mr. Trump's following. Instead, he's following something more difficult to determine. I don't have a name for it. He's restless, and he jumps from subject to subject. I'm not sure that it's a bad thing, Germanicus. Have you decided?
People accuse Mr. Trump of being unself-aware, but I think in one central existential aspect. He is acutely self-aware 24/7. And that awareness is that there is only so much time left for him to make the mark that he knows he must leave to be able to pass on, as it were. And so he's driven by a tremendous, brutal urgency, which I think helps to explain his restlessness and his energy. And there are several achievements that he is committed to achieving, to place the U.S. again on a firm and stable fiscal position, to not simply control the border, but to, purge the invasion that occurred under Mr. Biden. The third would be to, as he's done, he's ended DEI, and there's still much work to be done, but DEI really stands for the corrosion in the core principle of the U.S., which is equality under the law and equality of opportunity. And he understands, as many do, that was in danger of being forever destroyed. But there's a final element that I think is essential. That is to have a marquee achievement. And of course, that's true of every president since the presidency itself became an imperial presidency under Woodrow Wilson, with a short period where the Hardings and Coolidges didn't worry so much about that. But since FDR especially, there's been this sense that, the president is the direct choice, divine choice to lead. And if the world can't be redeemed, then it must be the U.S. itself. And so blue tends to be in the world redeemer aspiration, and red seems to be the non-neocon red, which is really most red, seeks to leave America secure and unassailable, and to the extent we can achieve this, more happy. So that resonates with our own founder, Mr. Washington.
Yes, but what we're observing now is, I said restlessness. It's a frantic pace.
Yes,
it is. It doesn't have a sense of proportion. It jumps from headlines about show business to opinions of almost anything cultural, including the Kennedy Center, to weighing invasion of Venezuela, to sending back-channel negotiations to Lavrov.
Well,
it's disorder.
Yeah, on the surface, of course. And so he is living in a chaotic swirl of one thing after the other all day and most of the night. But I'm confident that he has at least this understanding of what he must do if he doesn't have an actual course of action that he's thought through. The concern I would have would be more physiological, and that is that the stress of his pace, combined with his age, will catch up with him. Now, Trump is a lot luckier. Mr. Trump's a lot luckier than Mr. Biden. He caught up to Mr. Biden while he was vice president, and then it was pathetic. With Mr. Trump, he sustained the onslaughts, but those took a toll. At some level, they took a toll. And so I would imagine that the actual physical decline will become more and more pronounced. And the issue there is that it will cloud his judgment.
You don't sound worried at this point.
Not at this point, but at some point, he may become more impulsive. He may become desperate, and lash out. And he, of course, has the power to do that.
Yeah.
So
and
just
what about the revenge cycles? It's trite. Indicting former directors of this and that.
Mhm.
It doesn't come to anything. It's not about the future. It's not about his job. It's not about the American people. It's certainly not about the cost of living.
Yeah, I understand, but every emperor has undertaken purges like that against enemies, and everyone remembers that Gaius Julius Caesar forgave Brutus, right? And he pardoned all these people, and then what happened? And this is so there's all of this aspect of triumph and tragedy. I don't know of any leader in the position of our emperor who has not pursued that policy.
Okay. I'm not convinced.
How so? Who in our lifetime or within our ambit or orbit of memory has refrained from that sort of action?
I know of no comparable revenge cycle under Eisenhower.
Well, Eisenhower never suffered, though, and never went through the kind of torments that Mr. Trump has.
I accept the fact that there's predicate. I'm looking at disproportionate actions.
Yeah. I think
having a fleet on Venezuela and indicting a member of the last administration for misconduct are not the same efforts.
Well, one concern I have, and this is more than a concern, as we drift into an emperor system, is that what you see in places like Brazil, where the president is headed for prison after he leaves office, and then if he gets back into office, he will go after his predecessor and put him in prison, is one of the key markers of collapse of a republic and its easy push into civil war. When that starts happening, the conflict, the fighting is not far away.
Germanicus is Michael Bleos. I am John Batchelor Gaius. We're off to the theater, but it's cold tonight. I hope they have the heat up and they get those flames written, and they try to pump hot air underneath the stands, but it's not very successful. 21st century knows how to do that. First century AD does not. And I'm told there's an entertainment tonight, but that was not on the bill, so it might have been more of that karaoke singing that we're getting, singing tributes to Boudica and that sort of thing. The Brits are foolish about Boudica. They're still talking about her 2,000 years later. Yes, we can find the burnt layer in Londinium. We understand. It happened once upon a time. This is the Friends of History Debating Society. Thank you for joining us live. We didn't come to any conclusions tonight. We're observing along the way. Are we a republic? Or are we an empire? And are we in transition? And will there be violence? Thank you.